Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Lauren Strauss. I teach Jewish studies here at American University, and I'm also affiliated faculty with the Center for Israel Studies, and I direct undergraduate studies for AU's Jewish Studies program. I am delighted to welcome you to the first webinar in this very important Fall 2024 series, Anti-Semitism, a Political Tradition, which consists of 6 talks highlighting the work and perspectives of our own faculty and alumni. I should add that I'm stressing our own faculty and alumni because this is really a response to a felt need by both people on campus and off campus that they wanted to learn about this increasingly important and unfortunately ever-present subject from the scholars who teach at and have learned at our institution. So thank you, all of you who reached out to tell us that you wanted to hear that. This series is co-sponsored by AU's Jewish Studies program and the Meltzer Schwartzberg Center for Israel Studies at American University. I especially want to thank the Center for Israel Studies Managing Director, Laura Cutler, for ably navigating so many logistics for our programs. It's a special treat for all of us that today's conversation features the director of the Center for Israel Studies, Professor Michael Brenner, and that next week's lecture will feature Professor Pamela Nadel, director of our Jewish Studies program. Everyone at American University joins me in extending a warm welcome to our audience, which now comes to us from around the world, and which includes friends of AU and of both of our sponsoring programs, as well as AU alumni, academic colleagues from many other institutions, and of course, most importantly, our own students. Now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Michael Brenner is Distinguished Professor of History and the Seymour and Lillian Abinson Chair in Israel Studies at American University. He also holds the Chair of Jewish History and Culture at Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, Germany, and he serves as the International President of the Leobeck Institute for the Study of German Jewish History. In 2021, he was the first recipient of the Salo Baron Award for Scholarly Excellence in Research of the Jewish Experience. He is the author of 10 books translated into over a dozen languages. His latest books are In Hitler's Munich, Jews, the Revolution, and the Rise of Nazism, and the book In Search of Israel, The History of an Idea. Professor Brenner, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for the introduction, but also for being so instrumental in designing this series. And I am very excited that we're able to draw on our own faculty for the whole series. Without much further ado, let me start with our topic. And since I am the first speaker in this series, I wanted to start with the question you all have heard: what is anti-Semitism? And I start with the question of a hyphen, because some people write anti-Semitism with a hyphen. Some, including myself, insist that there should be no hyphen. And that's more than just a cosmetic question. Anti-Judaism has a hyphen, anti-socialism, anti-feminism, whatever. Many of those phenomena have a hyphen. Why shouldn't anti-Semitism have one? Well, for once, there is no Semitism, or I would be happy if anybody could tell me what Semitism means. There are Semitic languages. Some people would say they're Semitic people, but Semitism does not exist. So it is a very artificial word, and we have a whole series on a word that actually doesn't make sense, because Semitism does not exist. So if you're anti-Semitism, what does that mean? And as we will see, anti-Semitism was an invention by a German journalist in 1879 to make something which is not rational, which is not scientific, it's not really a phenomenon that is explainable in terms of scholarship, namely anti-Jewish hatred, into a respectable, uh, scientifically sounding term. Now, there has been a lot of discussion about definition. What is anti-Semitism? Let's say without a hyphen. What is it? And the most, very often what we hear, one of the definitions is the so-called IRA definition, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. I'm just reading one sentence. It's, of course, a longer text, including examples, which says anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Is that correct? Of course, that's not wrong, but does it help us really to understand what anti-Semitism is when we see it? No, it needs to be interpreted. Which perception and which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews, it leaves a lot of things open. So do the examples it gives. But that's not because this is a bad definition. It's because every definition is open to interpretation. That is true for two others which have been quoted a lot among colleagues, the Jerusalem Declaration and the Nexus Project. And as much as I admire the colleagues who helped draft all of those definitions, I am against finding one definition which we all have to recognize. What's scholarship about? We all struggle with definitions. We all want to create new definitions. And if you, in the old times when we all had encyclopedic books in our hand, the old encyclopedias, of course, not every encyclopedia had the same definition for every term. And that's the case with anti-Semitism as well. So I have no problem with not finding one universally recognized definition of anti-Semitism. I also don't think that we have a universally recognized definition of racism or other similar phenomena. Sometimes you find definitions which are not very scholarly. I think it was actually attributed to Albert Einstein. Well, if you don't know, in the 20th century, if somebody said something smart, it's very often attributed to Einstein, that Jews are the paradigm case of the dislike of the unlike. And I like that. It's very simple. And Jews were, as a small minority in many societies over the ages, in Islam, in Christianity, in modern secular society, always a small minority, and very often the only one. And they were different in visible and in invisible ways. And I think that catches something of the to explain modern anti-Jewishness and anti-Jewish hatred. Now, I don't want to go back. Don't. I'll only talk for about 40 minutes. Um, but I think we do have to go back for a moment to the beginnings of Jewish history. When we look at the Bible, the book that is usually attributed as one of the latest books of the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, the book of Esther, has already a description that is quite interesting. In this book, Haman said to King Xerxes, "There is a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury." So this is going back over 2,000 years. And we find some of the accusations we find later. We have Roman writers like Tacitus who also say Jews are separate, they're different, they do things differently. They don't pray to our gods. They have their own one invisible God. They keep their dietary laws. They keep their Sabbath, and so on. And to a certain part, it's true. Jews did keep certain things different. They did obey the king's laws, but they had also their own laws for their everyday life. So the dislike of the unlike. And I think with the beginning of Christianity, we have a different component coming into anti-Judaism. Religious anti-Judaism, Jews seen as the murderer of Christ, and not only as the murderer of Christ, of Jesus Christ, but of incarnations of Christ over and over and over again. In the Middle Ages, they're accused of stealing the host, which is nothing else but Christ's body, and stabbing it. With other words, killing Christ again. We have the accusation of killing Christian children and using their blood for ritual murder, like we have depicted in this famous depiction of Simon of Trieste in the year 1475. And there are many other anti-Jewish images in Christianity, images like the Jewish sow or pig in the middle here, actually at the church in which Martin Luther was a priest. We have the image of Jews as devil-like creatures, or on the left, the synagoga and the ecclesia. That on the right, you see the the woman representing the Jews with the blind, who is folded and can't see the truth, and next to it, the triumphant church Christianity. Many of those images, which I won't explain in detail because that's not the main topic today, but we have to think of the power of these images. And to a certain extent, it is maybe more surprising that Jews actually were not annihilated, that they were not killed altogether, but they actually survived as a small minority in empires in Christian Europe, but also in Islam, when it would have been very easy for the church to get rid of them, as they got rid, for example, of Christian heretics. But there were also, of course, reasons why the people of Jesus and the witnesses of Jesus should not be killed. And there is a whole theology in Christianity. And I think that is actually important, because it is wrong to think that the Christian church, even though they persecuted the Jews and discriminated them, wanted to kill them. They did not. And even in the Spanish Inquisition, those who were accused and whom the Inquisition even had the right to judge and to form a court upon were only those who had converted to Christianity, who were Christians, because that was under the jurisdiction of the Inquisitionary courts. So it is only in the modern time that the question of what the Nazis later called the final solution of the Jews appeared. The Christian church, Catholics, and others sometimes expelled Jews from their countries and empires, but they did not kill them in any way systematically. And it is only in modernity, and we talk about the 19th and 20th centuries, that anti-Judaism now becomes a question of race and a political issue. Modern anti-Semitism, in that sense, really is a phenomenon of the 19th century. There are precursors, there are anti-Jewish race laws in the Spanish Inquisition. I'm happy to talk about it, but systematically, this question as a political question starts to become relevant only when religion actually starts to disappear as the main force in society. And when we ask ourselves, why was there this transformation of anti-Jewish feelings and the birth of modern anti-Semitism in the 19th century? There are many reasons, and maybe they're connected. We are in the age of industrialization that sees many losers in society, especially the traditional um, uh, peasants, the artisans, people who now lose as we see a rapid industrialization and urbanization happening. Jews, on the other hand, used to be, and I'm talking about 19th century Europe, um, at the very bottom of society, especially in Germany in the 19th century. Um, Not all of them were poor, but they were outside the society that was recognized as the Christian state. That started to change in the course of the 19th century when Jews slowly became citizens of their respective states, and more importantly, saw economic rise and social integration, while many others saw themselves and were seen as losers. So the one population, the one level of population that was always, people could always look down to, now started to be in their own social strata, or started to rise even to middle and upper middle class. And at the same time, there was this search for scapegoats. Whose fault is it that we are suffering now? Well, you could point to the elites of the state. You could point to the complicated economic transformation, but it was always easier to find the one minority that was outside the traditional structure of the state to blame for and to scapegoat. And that were the Jews as the classical other. They were blamed, as you probably all know, both for the rise of modern capitalism. Well, look at the Rothschilds, one of the most successful banking families in Europe. Oh, look at Karl Marx. Well, he was baptized as a child, but he came out of a Jewish family. The rise of communism. It's both the Jews' fault. It's a certain contradiction to blame them for capitalism and communism, as they really ran against each other. But nevertheless, contradictions were never much something anti-Semites cared about. So what was new in this new anti-Semitism? First of all, the term. As I mentioned at the beginning, it was a German journalist, not a very well-known one, called Wilhelm Marr, who wrote a few anti-Jewish books, which usually painted the picture of a very frightening rise of Jewish power against a decrease of German power. So there was he painted the fear of this new rising force of Judaism. And you can hear it in the title of his 1879 book, The Victory of Judaism Over Germandom, regarded, as he said, from a non-denominational point of view, meaning not from a Christian point of view. And he didn't care about religion. So here we do have the rise of secular anti-Semitism. Very soon, it becomes a political phenomenon. That means anti-Semitism makes its way into a lot of parties and associations, but also there are now even parties that define themselves by anti-Semitism, and some of them call themselves by the name of anti-Semitic. Um, so in a way, the attempt to erase this idea of the dislike of the unlike was condemned to fail because now it was impossible to assimilate in a way Jews could do before by converting to Christianity. That usually opened the way for individual Jews into mainstream society, still in the 19th century. But now, in the course of that century, for those who believed in the existence of a Jewish race, it didn't matter if you assimilated, if you converted. In fact, that was even worse if you assimilated, because these were the invisible Jews, but their blood was seen as inferior to the Aryan race, and it could not be changed by converting. And this is not my topic today, but it's important as a footnote. That's, of course, also how modern Zionism was born. Theodor Herzl, the founder of the Zionist movement, was a journalist in Vienna, writing for one of the most respected German language newspapers, and he wanted nothing more to be a German writer. He also wrote a lot of plays, not the most successful ones, but some of them were performed. And Theodor Herzl realized at some point that he was always seen as a Jew, even though he didn't care about it. He was not religious. He even had a Christmas tree in his home. He didn't have his son, he didn't have him, had a Brit Milah, circumcision, and he didn't give him a bar mitzvah, but he was always seen as a Jew. And when he first wrote in his diary, how do we solve this? And how do we overcome the fact that we're always seen as Jews, even if we want to assimilate? He had a very, well, I would say not a very original idea. He described in detail how he would lead all the Jews of Vienna into St. Stephen's Cathedral, and they would all be baptized, until he realized that doesn't work. That doesn't work, because this anti-Semitism now is not the old religious anti-Judaism, and they will still be seen as Jewish. So that's how he came up with the idea. We need our own state. We need our own Jewish state. One of the people who actually was one of the first to use racially um, racially founded anti-Semitism was the very famous composer Richard Wagner. And he wrote in 1850, first published anonymously, he republished it later under his own name, a little book called Jewry in Music. And in this book, which is really terrible to read even today, he writes about the damaging influence of Jews and of Judaism in musical life. He says they have no ability to be original. They can only copy. And in his attack against Jewish composers, what he considers Jewish composers, he doesn't care if they're converted, if they were baptized as children, like the famous composer Felix Mendelssohn, a grandson of the Jewish philosopher Moses Mendelssohn. But Felix Mendelssohn, not only was he baptized and Protestant, he also was a famous composer of church music. But for people like Wagner, and now we see the new racial anti-Semitism, he always remained a Jew. Anti-Semitism became, as I said before, a political movement. It also made its inroad into the most respectable circles of German politics and academia. in 1879, happened to be the same year Marr created that term of anti-Semitism. There was already a debate called the Berlin Anti-Semitism debate, which was initiated by one of the most respected German historians and a conservative member of the Prussian parliament, Professor Heinrich von Treitschke. And Treitschke wrote about especially Jews who come from Eastern Europe. So immigrants, of course, are always even worse than the Jews born in the country. And he called them those young Jews who sell pans, and depicted them in almost ridiculous ways. And he created a line that would later be repeated in the most terrible Nazi anti-Semitic journal, Der Stürmer, namely, the Jews are our misfortune. And if you look down here, if you know some German, die Juden sind unser Unglück. The Jews are our misfortune. That became the slogan in long into Nazi Germany, but was created by a German historian and respectable politician in the 1870s. Another one who brought anti-Semitism from religion to politics was the court preacher of the German Emperor William II, and that was Adolf Stöcker, who, very unlike Wilhelm Marr, who was kind of a very secular person and even anti-church, he wanted a Christian state. He was more of a traditional anti-Semite. He was very scared by the rise of socialism on the left, and first wanted just to counter socialism with a church movement and political party called the Christian Social Workers Party. He realized it didn't go so well, and he found a new enemy or scapegoat, the Jews, when he recreated his party, and now actually it was more successful. He was elected to parliament, and he became one of the most famous anti-Semitic preachers and politicians in Imperial Germany in the late 19th century. Anti-Semitism pervaded German society. It made its way into some of the largest organizations, professional organizations, the German Peasant Association, Middle Class Employees Associations, and the Conservative Party. And you saw more and more postcards like that, like those to the right. Some of them, like the one on the bottom, Gruß aus Borkum, is a greeting card from one of the popular northern German sea resorts, which prided itself to be free of Jews already in the late 19th century. That's not in 1930s Hitler's Germany. There were many vacation resorts that did that. And then very often the neighboring resort was very happy to welcome Jews and made this public because it was also business. Actually, next to Borkum, the next island was called Norderney, and in the slang, it was always called the Jewish island. But you can just see when you look at these pictures and you think of vacation resorts and associations adopting anti-Semitic ideas and principles, how much it pervaded everyday life. And not only in Germany, maybe even more so in Austria, where the mayor, starting in 1897, was an outspoken anti-Semite called Karl Lueger. He actually was first elected in 1894, and the emperor, Franz Joseph, who had to confirm the election, refused, and he did so a year later. And when he was the third time re-elected by the city council in 1897, Lueger was appointed mayor. He was more of an opportunistic anti-Semite, not maybe not in the modern racial sense that everyone who has Jewish blood has to be banned, but he's famous for the quote, "I decide who is a Jew." So he would decide and he would make his exceptions. And that also shows you, even after the rise of racial anti-Semitism, there was a whole range of anti-Semitisms around, and that remained religiously dominated, economically dominated, politically or racially. It was in the city of Vienna when Lueger was mayor um, that not only Theodor Herzl lived there and witnessed it, but also the young Hitler. And at least, as he said later, he admired Lueger, who was still mayor when Hitler came to Vienna. Going from Germany, Austria to France, there was also an anti-Semitic movement there, which, of course, again, Theodor Herzl witnessed when he became the Paris correspondent for this New Free Press, his paper in Vienna. In 1895, he witnessed the Dreyfus affair, um, and Alfred Dreyfus was a French Jewish officer who was wrongly accused of treason, of high treason against the French state. I think many of you are familiar with this. It's not important if a Jew committed high treason or not. Because, why wouldn't there Jewish criminals? Of course, there are Protestant and Catholic and Jewish criminals. Dreyfus did not commit it, as we all know, and he was later rehabilitated. But what Herzl witnessed were calls not against Dreyfus, but against the Jew Dreyfus and then the Jews. And Herzl realized that if there is anti-Semitism in the motherland of Jewish emancipation and of, you know, the principles of the French Revolution, then Jews will not be tolerated anywhere in the world. That was his conclusion. And of course, there were many more radical anti-Semites in France at the time. You see here the book cover of one of the books of Edouard Drummond, who wrote a book that Jewified France, France Juif, and in 1887. And anti-Semitism did increase during World War I. In fact, when we go back to German Jews, most of them actually had very high hopes when the war started. They thought now, as soldiers in German uniform, they would be able to prove themselves as equal and be recognized as such by the German population. But again, as the war processed and Germany didn't do so well as they hoped, what did the Prussian Army Command initiate? A so-called Jewish census. They counted all the Jewish soldiers in uniform, supposedly to disclaim the myth that Jews would not serve or would not serve in equal numbers. Of course, the result was that Jews served exactly in equal numbers as non-Jews, but it was only published about 15 years after the war. What instead happened is that right after the war, a new legend, a new myth started, the so-called stab in the back legend. And if you look at the illustration to the left, I don't have to explain much. You see this very stereotypical Jewish figure stabbing the German soldier in the back. Both Jews and socialists were accused to have been enemies in the midst of Germany, because how could German soldiers lose a war? That was impossible, right? So it must have been enemies within Germany. And those were the ones who were not the real patriots. Both Jews and socialists were attacked of the stab in the back legend. Um, in the years to follow, there is a paradoxical development. The German Republic, the so-called Weimar Republic that was now founded, saw Jews rising to positions they'd never been before. Bavaria had a Jewish prime minister in 1918, and there was a German foreign minister, Walter Rathenau, in 1922. Jews were presidents of universities, which hadn't been possible before. The famous painter Max Liebermann became the president of the Prussian Academy of Arts. But the other side was that they also that anti-Semitism now became much more violent. Both the first Bavarian Prime Minister Kurt Eisner was murdered, assassinated by a right-wing extremist just a few months after he was in office, and so was Walter Rathenau, the German foreign minister, a few months after he entered office. It was in this climate of Germany feeling humiliated after World War I, because it was declared not just the loser, but also the country that had initiated the war, and it had to pay high reparations, had to give back territories to France and to Poland. In this climate of humiliation, that radical parties and organizations were on the rise. Among them was a small party, which later would be known as the Nazi Party, and whose leader, Adolf Hitler, became in 1921. And if you would reduce um, the idea of what he promised Germany after being humiliated, I think we could call it "Make Germany Great Again." That's what he promised Germany. He said we would take back the annexations, the unemployment would go away, the economy will be great, and we will become a respectable nation again. Hitler rose to power. Hitler wanted to rise to power from his base in Munich. You see him here uh, in a beer hall. These were the typical places where big political events took place in Munich. And it was in a beer hall that he tried to come to power in November of 1923. It failed. It was suppressed by the then Bavarian government. But Hitler rose even after this attempted insurrection as the new hope of the German nationalists. He was, as you can see, well, you can see at the bottom here the group of instigators of this insurrection in 1923, and what happened after trying to attack and tumble the German democracy and republic. The judges gave extremely mild verdicts, and he spent less than a year in prison. In December of 1924, Hitler was already free. And I wouldn't even call it prison. Look at the picture on the top. That's Hitler in prison, in his typical Bavarian clothing, with his close friends. You see, for example, Rudolf Hess, second to the right, his later deputy. I would call it a writer's retreat. He wrote Mein Kampf, his main political work, during this year he spent in the Landsberg prison. But what I think is most important is that Hitler and his party realized that attacking Jews does go kind of unpunished. There was no substantial support the Jews he and his party attacked received from politicians, judges, from the police, or from the clerics in Munich in 1923. And in fact, if you read some of the event reports of November 8th, 9th, 1923 it sounds almost like what happened exactly 15 years later on Kristallnacht on November 9th, 1938. Jews were taken out of their homes. Some were um, uh, treated really violently, badly, and some were abducted, and some the windows of some Jewish stores were smashed, also of the Social Democratic newspaper, of political opponents as well. So here we are with a political uprising, with a political rising leader and a party that fully adopted anti-Semitism into their program. Um, it took 10 more years. It was in January of 1933 when Hitler then was appointed the Chancellor of Germany. It was a legal process. It was not a coup d'etat. It was not a putsch or a beer hall putsch like 10 years earlier. Hitler came to power by legal means, even though his party never received close to 50% of the German votes by then. It was the largest party in a very fragmented and polarized political system. In a time of political chaos, of economic misery after the crash of 1929. And it could only happen with the help of his partners, because his party did not have the necessary majority of 50% of the votes. His conservative partners, who all thought they would be able to outsmart him, they would be able to sideline him. And in the end, the only thing they were enablers who made it possible that the most radical German politician became prime minister or chancellor of the German Reich in 1933. Just as an afterword, of course, you would, or you might think that after the Holocaust and after all that followed, this horror show of anti-Semitism, which had not only cost 6 million Jewish lives, but destroyed large parts of Europe, including Germany, would go away after people would do that lesson. But of course, we all know that this did not happen. And I think it is very important to say that anti-Semitism begins with Jews, but it never ends with Jews. And when I'm asked sometimes to fight anti-Semitism as a Jew, I think, okay, yes, it makes sense. People who want to do bad things to us, we don't like them. But it's not it shouldn't be a Jewish thing to fight anti-Semitism. It should be a matter for everyone who wants to preserve values of humanism, of democracy. And that, I think, is very, very important to see, because it does not end with the Jews. Of course, and that will be dealt separately, I think, next week with my colleague Pamela Nadell. We see many of the anti-Jewish graphics, the rhetoric, the words, the images now turned against Israel as kind of the new collective Jew. And I want to be very careful, not, in my view at least, not every expression of anti-Zionism is necessarily anti-Semitism, but very often the borderline is crossed, and these are just one of the more radical pictures where you can see it. And of course, and that will be the topic in this series as well, it's not a European phenomenon. It's not something which today would be restricted to hating Israel. Anti-Semitism is on the rise in America, and it's never been, America has never been free of anti-Semitism, but compared to Europe, I would say it was always a minor phenomenon. What we see today is something which surprises many of us, even many of us who dealt with it academically for a long number of years. So thank you very much, and I hope you have questions.
Woo! Thank you, Michael. That was, I think, a whole semester's course in 40 minutes and brilliantly done. You are, of course, efficient in just, laying out these parameters. And so I will remind the listeners that you should please write your questions into the Q&A function at the bottom, starting to collect one or two questions. And so while we're waiting for a couple of people to do that, I will start off with a question. And I know it's a big one. And we often hear, we've heard for years that the rise of Hitler and Hitler becoming chancellor after the downfall of Weimar Germany was a democratic process, and that he was elected and that it was not a violent overthrowing of Weimar. And without getting into too many details of how this happened, what kind of lessons can you draw from that to perhaps the fatal flaws of the democratic process? How does our knowledge of Hitler, for that matter, some other takeovers, how can it serve as a cautionary tale for people living in a democracy and wanting to avoid being overtaken by authoritarianism?
Yeah, I mean, as historians, we try to be careful with comparisons because circumstances are different, and circumstances are different without any doubt in today's societies in Europe or in America from Germany of 1933 or 1932 or whatever. But there's striking parallels. There's striking parallels where politicians try to undermine democracy from within the system. And I think that's what we're seeing in America today and in many European countries today, and around the world. Um, and it's the language, it's the methods, and it's the goals. Now, that doesn't mean that at the end is a Holocaust or even mass murder or some, but it means that there is the building of conspiracy myths, which always somehow are related to anti-Semitism. There is the depiction of groups, be it Jews or Muslims, immigrants or Black people or whoever, who are who are depicted as villains, as people made responsible for the suffering of the population, as scapegoats. They're the most irrational deeds ascribed to them and believed by people. And worse than all of this, there are the enablers who know better, and who make it possible to erode democratic values from within. And that's my point. When you erode democracy and values of tolerance and humanism, you always hurt the Jews. You always also um, um, bolster anti-Semitism. I think you're muted.
Yes, we have a bunch of questions coming in. A maybe quick one would be from Ken Auerbach. The two best books on the history of anti-Semitism that you recommend.
Well, I recommend that maybe we would provide on our website a list of books, which I don't want just to mention two random books.
That's a great idea.
But thanks for the question.
Um,
Okay, if I need to mention one book for you, I would mention David Nurm, but it's more a history of the, anti-Semit of anti-Judaism before anti-Semitism, but I think it's a recent book. It's worth reading. It's David Nirenberg's History of Anti-Judaism. I think that's
well, that's a perfect segue to the next question you got, which is from Leslie Friedberg. You talked about using the hyphen or not. What's your opinion of using the term anti-Jewish instead of anti-Semitism?
Well, you're right. Of course, using the term anti-Semitic and anti-Semitism, as I said, it's not a term that makes actual sense. But I think we have used it for 150 years. It's become a very established term with a life of its own. And as so many other terms we use, and if we look at them closely, they actually don't make sense. I think it's okay to use it. Sometimes you hear the argument, well, there can't be anti-Semitism in the Arab world because these are Semitic people, and how can they be anti-Semitic? You know, that I don't buy that, because anti-Semitism is just another word for a modern expression of anti-Jewish hatred, no matter where it takes place. Sure, anti-Semitism may be different, but there was anti-Semitism, there is anti-Semitism also in the Arab world, and that's not a contradiction.
I'm going to conflate a couple of questions that we got, of course, about the current situation, very close to home, especially on college campuses. So Miriam Isaacs asks, I'm interested in what you have to say about Jewish reactions to this, and especially self-defense efforts. And I'll add to that Deborah Ross's question, what do you think is the best way, so speaking of self-defense efforts, the best way to counter anti-Semitism on college campuses today?
I wish I had an easy answer, and we all wish that.
Oh, sure.
And I studied a little bit the history of Jews countering anti-Semitism in Germany in the 1920s and 30s, and even before. And they really tried. It's not true when people say, oh, they didn't see that. No, there were organizations, hundreds of thousands of people were actually committed to fight it, Jews and non-Jews. They fought it with legal means. They fought it with, publishing books and pamphlets and trying to tell the truth. But the anti-Semites didn't want to hear it. And if they won court trials, which they often did, I mean, the Jewish fighters against anti-Semitism, then of course they would say, oh, of course, the justices or the judges are like Judaized, they're influenced by Jewish money or whatever. They always had an answer, and they always have an answer. It's the problem of fighting in the essence an irrational line of thought with rationalist counter arguments. And that's hard. I only think we have to do that. We don't have a choice. We have to spread what is Jewish history, what is Israel, what it stands for. And we have also to show lies when there are lies. So I think that's very important. In my view, we have to do it in a civil discourse way, because on campuses, that's what we should do. We should engage people in dialogue. We shouldn't, avoid dialogue, as many do on both sides. And that's the wrong way, in my view. But I think we need also to use, I would personally not recommend to use their own weapons, the classical anti-Semitic weapons of lies and conspiracy myths. I think we don't want to do that, and we won't gain by that. If it's possible to successfully erase anti-Semitism, I think, again, Einstein supposedly said, it's easier to crack an atom than prejudice. Prejudice will always be there, was always there. And we really have to double our efforts to, talk to our students, talk to our colleagues, and tell story as we see it.
Which is exactly the reason that we
And,
organized
and
this
if I
webinar series.
if I may add, exactly, that's why we do this. But also, and I see we have a lot of people listening. Um, it is important to teach first year students in courses like our AUX courses about anti-Semitism. They have to understand what it is and how
That's right.
dangerous it is. And again, that it's not a problem for Jews only. It's a problem for everyone who believes in our democracy.
So on that note, actually, we've had a couple of questions about other trends today, both in Europe and in the United States, that involve not only vilification of Jews but also others. One listener, Judy Spector, points out that yesterday in Austria, the Freiheit Party quote won, and they didn't get a majority, but that this far right party advanced more than they had for decades. Other people are writing in to ask about your opinion about what's happening in large portions of the United States today, and asking you whether you think the conditions are different here, or how different the conditions are here or in Austria today from Germany at the end of Weimar.
Mhm. Um, well, as I say, conditions are different, but if you had asked me 10 years ago, if anything, what we see today, the anti-Semitism happening in political life, but also on campuses, but also, you know, in Charlottesville, where people shout anti-Semitic slogans, I can't help but saying a political candidate uh, basically sees, that there are good guys there. That we should be a big outcry when we see these things, and we should call anti-Semitism when it is anti-Semitism. There is no way we can hide from that. And in Austria, yeah, it's interesting. The right-wing party got about almost 30% of the vote. They probably won't form the government because there's 70% on the other side. But there is, not much open anti-Semitism in these political movements nowadays. I think there's a lot of anti-Semitism under the surface, but openly now it's an anti-Muslim movement, an anti-immigration movement. Um, and after the Holocaust in Europe, and here too, but in Europe especially, um, people are cautious in calling themselves anti-Semites. But if you look at their ideology, it's part of it, even if they declare to be friends of Israel and of the Jews. If you look at it, it's not. And they relativize the Holocaust. They don't want that be part of the real heritage of Austria or of Germany, these right-wing parties. And here too, if political leaders meet with anti-Semites and Nazis, then that is dangerous, and we should call it out. And the truth is, there's no excuse for that.
So I know that we could have a whole extra hour talking about strategies, and a lot of people are writing in. It is 5:03 Eastern time anyway, and so we do have to wrap up. But I do want to say that there are people writing in asking about how best to convey this kind of education to others. And I'll give one of our students the last word here. And Stephanie Ratz, who graduated from AU this past year, a Jewish studies student, and is now studying in Ireland. And she's writing in that she sees a lot of anti-Semitism around her. And again, we don't have time to get into the nuances of the narrative in Ireland, which is a particular focus. It is daunting. How would you, very briefly, suggest that people who have knowledge try to convey it to others and try to fight against these anti-Semitic ideas?
Well, I think that, on campus, we clearly know, as professors or even as students, how to talk to students or to colleagues or to other students. But I think it's also important because I know there are also a lot of parents here to do it on your workplace or to do it out in the street. And I think often, not always, but often it's also, not enough knowledge that it's out there. And I think I'm not too naive and think knowledge can heal everything, but more knowledge is definitely something that helps and it's important. And we also have not to be blinded. And we know anti-Semitism can come from different corners. It's not restricted to the political right. We've seen it on the political extreme left. We have seen it, of course, in radical Islamic circles. So it can come from very different corners. But I think if we help to restore a, civic discourse and a democracy where people respect each other. And I think that's something also our new president is trying on campus. Our new AU president is trying to do with the new initiative of the civic life.
Mhm.
That, maybe we should first listen to each other. And I would even go a step further. It's very important to detect anti-Semitism, but sometimes we might also detect anti-Semitism where maybe there is an anti-Semitism. That's also important before we make our judgments. Maybe hear the other part, hear their arguments, talk to each other, develop a way of civic discourse that really clearly is directed against the creation of conspiracy myths and scapegoating of whatever community it is.
Thank you. Thank you so much. To those of you who are writing in now, uh, I think that I think that you will hopefully maybe know from this that in future lectures, you can be writing those questions into our Q&A function before the end of the lecture as you think of them and not wait, because the longer you wait, the less chance it is with this very long list of questions that we just got in the last minute and a half that we can get to
I
all of
actually just want to say one word. My topic today was not, and because I saw some of the question, was not anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. That is the topic of next week, also on campuses. I've written about this elsewhere, but that will be the topic of my colleague Pamela Nadell next week.
Right. So there are unfortunately many aspects of this topic, many more out there, and that is why we have this wonderful series where you will be hearing from 5 more scholars in the coming weeks, and I. As I told Michael, as I told Professor Brenner earlier this week, I'm so glad that he was the first one so that he could give us that historical framework for the modern age. But don't worry if you have an unanswered question. Hopefully, we will be addressing in the coming weeks many of your questions and many of the topics. I want to again thank Professor Brenner so much for this incredible framework and wealth of information that he's conveyed to all of us. Thank you all for listening. And please remember that next week on October 7th, Professor Pamela Nadell will be talking about anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and talking in particular about a guide that she spearheaded the writing of at AU on anti-Semitism on campus. I hope to see all of you, or at least to know that you're all out there next week. And thank you again for attending, and you will hear from us. And on another note, because this is happening before next week, to those of you who observe the Jewish holidays, I wish you, and we all wish you, a very, very sweet year, a peaceful and a healthy year. Shana Tova U'Metuka. May it be a better one and a healthy and safer and more peaceful one for everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.